Florida man attempts to make neighbors sick with chemicals. Tampa, Florida. This video shows a Tampa man injecting a syringe full of chemical opioids under the door of a neighboring family. The family had previously been the subject of several other noise complaints from Zhuming Li, but they had no idea that he would go to such extreme measures. After the family, including an infant, became ill several times, the father installed a camera in a potted plant outside their door. This camera eventually caught Li, a chemistry PhD student, pumping hydrocodone and methadone into the apartment. Li faces a series of charges, including several felonies related to the incident. Fortunately, while many members of the family suffered symptoms, none of them were permanently injured due to the chemical attack. Woman shoots at neighbor's home before trying to burn it down. Del City, Oklahoma. Oklahoma resident Annie Durham was involved in a dispute with her neighbors but decided to take things to a very extreme level. Video footage shows Durham literally turning up the heat on the conflict by throwing a flaming stick and rag over her fence into her neighbor's open garage. As if this wasn't bad enough, footage from earlier in the day shows her firing a handgun into the same open garage door. Interestingly enough, the footage came from Durham's own surveillance system, which she personally consented to turning over to the police. Reports indicate that Durham and her neighbors had very hostile relationships, but nobody expected things to escalate to this level. The fire ended up doing enough damage that the neighbors had to abandon the home. Durham in the meantime faces a litany of serious charges. Man attempts to destroy Ring doorbell for overlooking his home. Birmingham, UK. Doorbell cameras are incredibly popular security measures due to their affordability and the increasing prevalence of package theft, but every once in a while these cameras end up recording things that are far more troubling. In Birmingham, England, a man named Stephen Grove launched a campaign against a camera owned by his neighbor. Apparently he felt the doorbell was aimed at his home and began taking measures to deal with the problematic front door accessory. Footage shows him being nearly flattened by his neighbor's door after removing the hinges to gain entry. In other clips, he tries to deface the lens with a hammer, a marker, and other implements. Man stabs neighbor 27 times over parking dispute. Gloucestershire, UK. Vandalism is one thing, but when tempers flare, sometimes things can turn deadly. This was the case in Gloucestershire, England, when 52-year-old Ken Arslan went on a stabbing spree over a parking argument. Arslan was known for threatening and harassing his neighbors and had even been charged over his behavior just a week before this incident. Footage from October of 21 shows Ken casually walking away from an off-duty policeman who had picked up a large piece of wood to defend himself.
You stand still now!
Moments before, Ken had stabbed his neighbor Matthew Mormon 27 times while on his way to attack another man, Peter Marsden.
No! Stop! Stop! Put that knife down now!
He's ordered to put the knife down but manages to enter and attack Mr. Marsden as well. He then calmly lights a cigarette before finally being stopped by other neighbors. Unfortunately, Mr. Borman eventually succumbed to his injuries. Chris Watch watches neighbors' footage of him murdering his family. Frederick, Colorado. One of the most famous and disturbing murder cases to come out of the US in recent years is that of Chris Watts, who in 2019 violently murdered his wife and 2 children. Like many family annihilators, Watts initially attempted to cover up the murders as disappearance. This footage shows Watts at his neighbor's home with the police attempting to see what can be gleaned from the neighbor's surveillance footage. Watts tells the officer that people had been stealing things in the area and that he suspects this may have been something to do with the family's disappearance.
We had issues the other week when people were stealing stuff out of like garages and stuff like that. And I had parked my truck.
I had your park right here.
Yeah.
So
I could see where someone tried to jimmy with a flathead screwdriver.
In this case, what's haunting is not the footage itself, but the fact that Watts knows full well he's already murdered his family and disposed of their bodies. As if by premonition, the moment Watts leaves, his neighbor turns to the officer and says he's not acting right.
No.
Watts would eventually be arrested and convicted of smothering his family and hiding them in an oil storage facility. Neighborhood arguments turn into murder. Fairfax County, Virginia. Unfortunately, not all surveillance footage tells the whole story. In the case of the March 2020 shooting of Maryland National Guardsman Javon Prather, it's hard to know precisely what happened due to the long history between him and his murderer. Former NASA employee Michael Heddle had had several altercations with Prather before the deadly incident took place. 6 months before the shooting, footage shows Prather driving by Heddle's home yelling curses at him. After police arrive, Prather also shouts at them. This suggests that whatever is happening, it's Prather who's the aggressor. However, on the day of the shooting, Heddle's Ring camera shows Prather walking down his stairs and banging on Heddle's door. Heddle answered with a barrage of gunfire that ended up killing Prather. He then threatens Prather's wife before finally allowing her to drag her husband's body over to her own yard. Heddle attempted to claim self-defense but was later found guilty of first-degree murder. Georgia murder suspect reacts to news that body was found. Macon, Georgia. One of the most gruesome murders to hit Macon, Georgia happened in 2011 when Lauren Giddings was murdered and dismembered by her neighbor and former classmate, Stephen McDaniel. In the early days of the investigation, the news and police interviewed McDaniel, who actively participated in the search for his victim. In the footage, McDaniel is calm, collected, and shows genuine concern for the missing girl. He admits to being classmates with her and speaks very highly of Lauren, going so far as to theorize that someone might have snatched her while she was out running.
The only thing we can think is that maybe she went out running and someone snatched her. Because, we went over, one of her friends had a key, we went inside and tried to see if there was anything amiss, but, she had a door jamb that was sitting right by it, so there was no sign that anyone broke in.
The coldest moment comes when the report tells McDaniel that body parts had been discovered and he can barely contain his shock.
What about in the parking lot area? I know they've been doing a lot of, I think that's where they have recovered the body or whatever they recovered from there.
Body?
Had you seen anything there? Had you seen anything there? We don't know if this is the same person. You know what I mean? They took out a body there earlier. We don't know if it's the same person or not. So that's how we're trying to ask people if they know who lived there. Are you okay, sir?
I think I need to sit down.
Okay.
He would plead guilty to her murder just 3 years later. Neighbor calls cops on young girl spraying for bugs. Misunderstandings are common when it comes to neighbors. However, sometimes racism and prejudice can compound even completely innocent situations. In October of 22, a 9-year-old African-American girl named Bobby was walking through her neighborhood spraying a homemade mixture to kill lanternflies. She just learned about the invasive species and was doing her part to curb their spread. But when her neighbor, Gordon Losh, saw her, he called 911 to complain.
There's a little black woman walking and spraying stuff on the sidewalks and trees. I don't know what the hell she's doing. It scares me, though.
Footage from the police cams show them confronting the child and her mother, assuring both of them that she's not in trouble.
No, you're not in trouble.
How many did you kill? How many trees did you save?
They're bad. They're all over the place.
Though Losh apologized, it led to a much larger discussion among the community. Why did this grown man think a 9-year-old with a spray bottle was a threat? We may never know. Kentucky police shoot woman waving gun at neighbors, Louisville, Kentucky. Innocent mistakes are one thing, but sometimes neighborhood arguments escalate to the point where police need to actively intervene. That's what happened in Louisville, Kentucky on February 19 of 23. A woman named Candy Marie Basil, who had a history of mental health problems, was waving a gun at her neighbors when police from the Metro Police Department arrived.
Drop the gun!
The men repeatedly orders Basil to drop the weapon, but she refuses. As she gets closer to the officers, they have no choice but to open fire.
Should have dropped the gun! Put it down! Drop the gun!
After rushing to the injured woman, 2 men secure the nearby vehicle and retrieve the weapon while another officer applies pressure to her wound. Basil was treated and survived, but was charged over the incident. Woman and her husband terrorized Black and Latino neighbors, Indianapolis, Indiana. It only takes one bad neighbor to cause serious problems for an entire community. That's just what happened in an Indianapolis neighborhood in 2018. Police arrived to find an older woman named Vicky who had reportedly threatened to kill her neighbors several times.
Don't touch me, I'll kill you!
The man had placed several no trespassing signs on their lawn, only to have Vicky crumple them and throw them in their faces. Apparently the situation had been brewing for several years, with Vicky and her husband often being accused of making racist threats over virtually nothing.
I feel safe when I'm indoors because I know that she can go in there.
She even called the police on her neighbors multiple times, claiming that they sell drugs.
It's been a living nightmare.
Vicky and her husband claim that they're the victims, but the footage seems to suggest otherwise. Homeowner catches creep filming family multiple times, Magnolia, Texas. A man in Texas began posting videos of his neighbor creeping around his property and family on YouTube. Footage from the man's surveillance camera shows that the neighbor was filming over and through his fence while he mows the lawn. The man reaches over to let the creep know he's aware of his presence. He then shuts off his lawnmower and offers to pose for the older man.
Let me pose for you?
The homeowner again confronts the man for taking photos over his fence, but he doesn't get much response.
You keep taking video like that, I'm gonna call the police on you. There's children around here.
Later footage shows the homeowner placing owls on the fence to keep his creepy neighbor at bay, though it's uncertain if they're still having a feud. 3 men beat and kill neighbor, claim he was a sex pest, Willenhall, UK. In 2018, 3 Willenhall men entered the apartment of Kevin Shepperson before tying him up and battering him to death. CCTV footage shows 22-year-old Wayne Kendall climbing up into Shepperson's flat where he assaulted him before letting his friend and cousin come in to finish the job. The trio not only stole the Shepperson's bank cards, but also his TV and PlayStation. The men claim Shepperson had confessed to being attracted to a 16-year-old daughter of a mutual friend, and this was the impetus for the attack. However, as no proof of that conversation exists, it's probable that this was merely an excuse for murder and robbery. Another parking space murder in the UK, Somerset, UK. In November of 21, Army veteran Colin Reeves murdered his 2 neighbors in cold blood over a parking disagreement. Footage from 10 days before the attack shows him sneaking up on one of the victims, Jennifer Chappell, and yelling obscenities at her as she enters her home.
She's the one who started it, so
Footage from even earlier shows that the two families had been arguing over parking spaces for roughly 6 months. Footage shows Reeves creeping over the fence before entering the home and stabbing the Chappells to death with a ceremonial army dagger. He then calmly leaves the house, calls the police, and turns himself in. Man stabs neighbor to death over motorcycle noise, Norfolk, UK. Because of stricter gun laws, stabbings are much more common in the UK than shootings. However, due to the personal nature of such attacks, they're often even more disturbing. One tragic 2022 case saw 48-year-old Jamie Crosby kill Dean Alsop, a father of 3, by stabbing him 17 times over the sound of his motorcycle. Footage shows police arriving on the scene to find Crosby coming out of the victim's home with his hands and face stained red. He's chillingly calm as the police officers talk to him about the incident and attempt to treat his injury. Even after he's arrested for murder, Crosby says he's very happy to be arrested for it. Neighbor stabbed after attacking teen TikTok user over posts. Cumberland, New Jersey. Murder over noise is one thing, but what about murder over TikTok? That's what prosecutors allege happened in May of 2020 when a teen TikToker killed his neighbor after posting a series of hostile videos. Footage shows 51-year-old William Durham, a corrections officer, pulling up with several of his kids in an attempt to assault 20-year-old Zachary Latham over the videos he'd been posting. Durham and his family ignore orders to leave the property and instead entered Latham's garage where a fight ensues. During the confrontation, Latham fatally stabs Durham to death. After a lengthy court case, it's determined that Latham acted in self-defense and he was eventually cleared on all charges of manslaughter. Couple catches their neighbors sneaking around their attic. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Violence is always terrifying, but sometimes neighbors act in ways that are far more creepy without doing any real harm. Such was the case for the Kennedy family, who found their neighbor Robert Havilla crawling around their attic with a drill during the summer of 2017.
For all these years, we have no idea what's been going on inside our own home.
The family has a home next to a dilapidated building owned by Havilla, who they described as reclusive. After hearing bangs and seeing things in the attic, the Kennedys installed a surveillance camera, catching Havilla in the act as he moved through the attic with a power drill. Apparently, the man had been putting up multiple holes in the walls and ceilings in what seemed to be an attempt to spy on the family. He later pled not guilty to the crime, but prosecutors were not having it. Peeping Tom arrested after looking through neighbor's window, Debris, Florida. Peeping on neighbors is a creepy pastime that goes back hundreds of years. According to psychologists, some people simply become addicted to the thrill of invading other people's privacy, leading them to repeatedly look in through windows and doors belonging to neighbors and strangers. This footage shows just such an incident taking place in Debris, Florida, outside Orlando. The man, later identified as 29-year-old Stephen Johnson, can be seen looking into various windows before being approached by a deputy who asks him what he's doing. The officer orders the young man to stop, but Johnson ends up running. Fortunately, they were able to use a drone to find him hiding in a swampy area. He was charged with stalking, loitering, and resisting an officer. Police engage man who pulled knife on neighbors, St. Paul, Minnesota. Again, not all arrests go quite so smoothly. In February of 23, a 65-year-old Minnesota man was shot by St. Paul police after neighbors called and said he was threatening them with a large knife. The man, Ye Zhang, was apparently having a mental health crisis and was hard of hearing.
Hey, stop walking! Come here! Hey, come here!
Nonetheless, footage shows police engaging the man at a senior living center, ordering him to take his hands out of his pockets and drop the knife before he calmly retreats into his apartment. At one point, Zhang opens his door and lurches at the officers who open fire. He later died as a result of his injuries. A 16-inch knife was recovered from his body. Man caught on tape cutting down neighbors' trees and denies it. Geelong, Australia. Fortunately, not all situations with bad neighbors end in bloodshed. In some cases, they actually end in laughs. This bizarre footage shows Dr. Mark Coulson of Geelong, Australia entering his neighbor's yard to cut down trees. Apparently, this isn't the first time the man, later dubbed Dr. Chop by the media, had done this. Earlier footage shows Coulson going to the front door in an attempt to see if anyone was home. He then enters the backyard and begins hacking at their granary. Though the doctor is clearly shown on film, he denied knowing anything about the incident. Many of the neighbors in the area later assumed that the doctor was trying to get a better view of a nearby park. Talk about the wrong way to do it. Neighborhood dispute leads to shooting. Ocala, Florida. In June of 2022, a dispute between Susan Larings and AJ Owens turned deadly. Owens went to confront her neighbor over yelling at her children, at which point Larings shot Owens through the door. Bodycam footage shows officers arriving at the scene before the shooting and attempting to intervene in the neighborhood feud.
Hello, Sheriff's Office. What's going on this evening?
They first speak to Larings, who says kids in the neighborhood were being loud, coming on her property, and stealing her no trespassing sign.
They know they're not supposed to be over here. They control the signs. They've previously stolen the trespassing sign. And the little kid tells me to shut up to my face. I said, don't be disrespectful to me. kind of just exchanging words back and forth. I'm like, listen, my name is Doctor. Like, don't tell me to shut up, and he was calling me names. I'm like, no, we're not going to do that.
She then claims AJ Owens, the kid's mother, threatened her. After taking her statement, the officers speak to Owens and her family. The kids were apologetic and claim that Lorraine is always yelling at them and calling them names.
Okay, I'm sorry.
You're okay.
Every time, even if we're not on our property, and we're just like being loud and playing basketball over there because we play basketball.
I got you.
Like, she just calls us names.
When the police left, things seemed to have calmed down.
Y'all have a good evening.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, not much time would go by before this neighborhood dispute left AJ Owens dead and her kids motherless.